So welcome, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, so all right, so we're going to shoehorn probably a 45-minute presentation into 35, which will allow us for some Q&A, and where we start off is this idea of turning innovation into sustainable movements, and I'm going to dig into this idea of why the key to innovation is culture. And when we talk to people, whether they're clients or folks at conferences or what have you, what we see is that the biggest problem with innovation is a lack of alignment across organizations. And without alignment, projects die. And when projects die, innovation movements grind to a halt. And the question is, what are the tools that you have to drive alignment and drive connection to the outcomes that you want your innovation to achieve for organizations? And the point here for us is that innovation is really all about culture. It's not about the technology, meaning the technology will flow if the culture is correct within the organization. But if it's not, everything sort of grinds to a halt. And so it is hard to get innovation to thrive, and we all, and we'll talk about this a bit more in a few minutes, but we hate change as humans, right? And so all innovation on some level requires change, and there's this huge resistance that we see that all innovators struggle with. And our perspective is that through culture, you're able to drive your influence as an innovator, right? And it's that influence that allows you to innovate. It's not the other way around. It's not that the innovation creates influence. It's that you've got to create your influence first to drive innovation. So this is a quote from Murray Gell-Mann, who we are big fans of, and Gell-Mann was a theoretical physicist, and he said, "Imagine how hard physics would be if electrons had minds of their own," right? And the point being, what you're dealing with in your organization, even if it's not a huge place, is a group of people who've all got their perceptions and thoughts about the innovation of the projects, whether they're worthwhile, whether the money's being wasted, whether they're afraid that their business unit's going to be, disrupted, whatever it might be. And the job of the innovator is first and foremost to align all those electrons, all those minds within the organization. And so, we have over the years, and Gapingvoid culture design has been around for about a dozen years. We were actually doing culture work for the 5-6 years preceding when the company formally started. But what we have been able to do is experiment and to drive culture change really across the entire economy. I'll talk a bit in a few minutes about some work we did at Edwards Air Force Base, where we increased innovation by over 100 times. But we've done culture change work in large healthcare organizations. We've done work in big technology, places like Microsoft, VMware. We started off in places like Zappos and Rackspace with these great CEOs who allowed us to come in and really experiment and build out methodology while we were helping them to make change. The point is that the approaches that we take apply to any kind of organization of any size, and it's really about how you connect people to the change that you want to create through redesigning and deliberately designing culture. And with that in mind, Mark Andreessen is credited with saying that software will eat the world, and we already see that happening. And for the little bit that's left for us people, culture is going to eat the human side of it. And so we believe that as leaders, whether we're in innovation or other parts of organizations, that we have an obligation to deliberately design and execute the cultures for our people to assure that they are more deeply connected to our organization and that they are getting what they want out of the work that they are doing, right? And the point being, if they're not getting what they want, they're going to be distracted and will not be fully engaged. They may not go, especially in this economy, they may not go and work somewhere else, but they're not going to give you their 100%. A lot of approaches towards culture, towards employee engagement, to really thinking about how organizations work is really about assessing, and looking what we would consider looking backward. And culture design and this idea of really orchestrating the future of the business is really about designing the outcomes that you want to have for people, and it's totally forward looking. So you only need to assess where you are to get a foundational beat on the reality of today. But everything that you should be thinking about, whether it's your innovation projects or and designing the culture around them, is really about the future. So fundamentally, when you're designing culture, what you're looking to do is drive and enhance human cooperation, right? And what that does is two things, and two things that you have to have in order to really be successful in innovation projects, which is organizing chaos and reducing complexity. And by organizing the chaos, reducing complexity, what you can then achieve is alignment around the outcomes that you want to have for your innovation project. But fundamentally, culture is the operating system of your business, right? And as it applies to innovation, without having people connected around why you're doing it and how you're doing it and how it needs to be done, the mindsets you need to have, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, you can never achieve that. And on a higher level, culture is actually a management system that drives the outcomes of your organization. And so as it relates to innovation, what you can do is connect people in a strategic and also tactical way to how innovation works and what you need them to be doing as part of your project. I wrote a piece for the MIT Sloan Review back in October, which really talks about the benefits of framing culture as a management system. I'd be happy to share that with anybody afterwards. If they want to email me, it's Jason@Gapingvoid or culture@Gapingvoid. We can share it with you. But what we saw in writing that article, I was writing about a research piece that we did that really talked about the impact of culture for organizations. And we can look at this and think, oh, it has nothing to do with innovation, but it has a lot to do with innovation, because what culture does when designed properly is it drives your operational outcomes. This is a piece of the study that was done by and contributed by a friend of ours at Harvard Business School named Len Schlesinger, and he talked about this idea of how culture actually delivers remarkably enhanced profits over companies' competitive sets. If you look at the list of companies on the right side of the slide, you'll see sort of the usual suspects, if you will. Whole Foods, Wegmans, Zappos, Nordstrom's. Companies that are very culture centric. And what Len did in his study was track profitability and share performance over an extended period of time, and saw that these companies outperformed their competitive set by 2 times. But it's not simply about economic performance. We in the report that we did looked at employee ratings of CEOs and ranked best and worst CEOs, and you can see on the left side of the screen a list of on the left side of that graph of that chart, the best performing CEOs by industry and worst on the right side. But what we were able to do was track that companies that have great cultures, not only are the CEOs liked more by their employees, but they also track directly to sales increases or decreases, increases for positive cultures and decreases for negative cultures over time. And so what we did through Lens data and then the work that we did was really develop what we call the culture science flywheel, which really talks about the power of culture to transform organizations. And I want to make the point here that when we think about innovation, innovation is part of this, and I'll go through the flywheel in a second. But when you're designing culture, it's really you're tracking to human behavior and how you create positive human behavior to drive outcomes. And for innovation, that's an essential piece of it. So in the study, just to summarize it, what happened was we looked at what happens to CEOs who invest in great culture, and we see that they wind up having employees as fans, right? So fans of the company, also fans of themselves individually. That in turn turns into a customer love of the organization. So customers love the same companies that employees love working for. Customer experience is a direct outcome of employee experience. And then it turns out that when we looked at the media reports on these companies, what we saw was that the media loves the same companies that employees love and customers love, right? Think about the transformation at Microsoft and the innovations that's come down to Microsoft for the last 5 years since Satya Nadella took over, right? We see this operational outcome that starts with employee as fans, customers loving the company, the media loves the company, and the outcome of that is that margins increase and operating results increase. Why? Because customers, and this is true for B2B, but it's also true to B2C, is that customers are less price sensitive when they're dealing with companies that they actually like and enjoy doing business with. So the combination of all these things then accelerates innovation, and for the purposes of this conversation, it's a really important piece because innovation thrives in environments, and we all know this already, where there's some tolerance to risk, where people feel like they're successful, where there's psychological safety, where they feel like they're connected to something larger. And the combination of the cultural norms that drive operating results, et cetera, also enhance innovation. The combination of all these things expand the influence of the company and the CEO, which in turn for public companies drives share performance, and then all this together again drives greater influence for the CEO and for the company itself. The point is that this model, right, applies to the CEO, but it also applies to the folks who are running innovation. If you can align people around culture, if you can show why it matters to customers, if you can get the buzz going right about the success of what you're doing and the importance of it, you will wind up with a flywheel that delivers more influence and greater outcomes. So the thing about culture, and one of the reasons why people struggle with it so much, is that it's a relatively new thing, right? I'm old enough to remember that when no one even talked about culture. It's been something that's developed over the last sort of 15 years as something that's really important to organizations. But the truth is that nobody took the culture design 101 class at business school. So in looking at this new area, it's really important to really get a sense of why and how you execute against culture, designing cultures. So just to summarize, successful innovation can only happen when people are aligned around the importance, and we'll talk a bit more. There's a model I'll share in a few minutes about that. So when they're aligned to why it matters to them and how it needs to get done, and that culture is driven by psychological norms, right? That you've got to really think hard about the norms of the organization. And those norms need to be explicit. And the collection of those ideas and those norms are what drive the behavior. So if you're thinking about how you get alignment around innovation, you've got to socialize norms that will drive people to align to the outcomes. And if you don't do it, then you will continuously have random experiences around driving the innovation across the org. And so with that in mind, I just want to talk for another second about rules versus norms. We all believe that in our organizations, and especially in highly regulated organizations, that our orgs run on rules, but in fact, they really run on norms. It's the norms that determine, how many emails a day you're fielding, how many meetings you're in. Are they back to back, 40 hours a week? Can you actually get work done? The thing about norms is that they're never stated. The rules are stated. We all understand what the rules are, right? But the norms are implicit, but they are what really drive behavior, right? And so when you think about designing culture, right, you're really designing the norms. And as it relates to innovation, you have to think about what are the norms that we have within the organization that address our tolerance to risk, to what we think about these innovation projects, et cetera, how we adapt to change. And again, I'll get into that in a bit more detail in a minute. So one of the things that we look at when it comes to designing culture and culture change, right, is really the difference between behavioral economics and classical economics. There's been a lot written and reported on in the last 20 years around behavioral economics. But when you look at making change happen in organizations, what people mostly think about is the classical model for change, which is we assume that people are rational actors, that we take in data, that we get clear insight about the change that wants to be made, that we want to be making. We then get clear understanding about the action that has to be taken, and we take that massive action, and then we have this optimized sort of process, decision making, execution. And we assume that organizations run this way, but in fact, they don't, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why we struggle with innovation, because it's all logical. It all makes sense. We all want to move forward. We all want to, to have a better organization or a better business or make more money or whatever it might be. But the problem is we have to deal with the realities of the way people actually behave. And, and so the behavioral economics model is really what you have to be thinking about, which is, when we want to make change happen, when we want to create a project or whatever, we do the data, right? We do the research, we understand what needs to happen. But that data immediately is confronted with our cognitive biases. You can look at there's a cognitive bias codex on Wikipedia. There's, I think, 250 or 275 cognitive biases in there. There's probably, another 250 to be discovered. But that data immediately confronts the mental models we have about the world, most of which are just not actually very accurate or helpful. And so what happens is we then sort of filter the data through the cognitive bias. We then resist because we all fundamentally hate change. Humans are hardwired to hate change. We resist the change. The organization resists the change. And what winds up happening is that we are then overwhelmed with emotion, right? And the reason why we're overwhelmed with emotion, there's a fellow named Antonio Damasio who discovered that our emotions and our decision-making ability, or ability to make decisions, reside in the same exact spot in our brains. Therefore, we are physically incapable of making a decision in the absence of emotion, and emotion is always a factor in decision-making, even though we pretend like it's not. It's just data-driven. So so we're overcome with emotion. We then rationalize the decision we're going to make, and when it comes to innovation, very often it's not the ideal outcome. It's the outcome that we think we can get the organization to accept. We then make our move to make whatever change, create whatever thing it is that we're working on, and then the tyranny of the status quo takes over, overwhelms the project, often will kill it, and what winds up happening is nothing. And the point is, though, that if you understand that this is the way the world actually is, this is the way people function and the way organizations function, then you can design for this. And the design of it is actually in crafting the culture that you want to have that will take these issues into account to still support and deliver the project. And when we're designing culture, what we need to remember is that culture is a social construct. You cannot train for it. You cannot tell people what to believe, which is why it's so messy, and which is why the solutions you normally use around culture, or around change, which is usually training, does not work. So fundamentally, the question is what are the conditions that have to be necessary to drive your innovation project? And what you have to remember, and it's so hard for us because very often innovation folks are engineers, they're scientists, they are project managers, they are people who are trained to deal with facts, and they believe that facts are what wins. And the truth is that's not really true. What wins is emotion. And what we must do is have to align the organization emotionally around the work that needs to be done. And so when we think about culture, it's about sharing ideas. It's about spreading the emotional norms, the way you want people to be thinking about your project, and letting those ideas combine in the organization. So, okay. So this is a very basic model that we use around culture change, and we'll talk in a minute about how it applies to innovation, and particularly one project that we did. And so very often when we are designing new outcomes, what we do is we do a process. We come up with a new SOP. We then give it to people and say, okay, do this instead of that. This is a new, more efficient, more effective process. This is a new thing we need to be doing, and we ask for new behaviors, right? And we all know the stats. 70 or 75% of the time, change projects fail. We don't actually get the behaviors that we want from folks. And so the reason for that, though, and it's a mystery in most organizations, which is why we still struggle with change, is that we've neglected to address the beliefs and mindsets that and the psychology in people's brains before they actually make that action, and we ask for the new behavior. And so if we're in designing culture, what we need to do is look at beliefs and mindsets and mental models and principles and worldviews, and yes, some values, but not really, values for us are not what people think they are. They are complex outcomes that often people do not even understand how to do. But what you've got to do is really simplify it for people, and and in doing that, what you're designing is the psychology of the organization that will give you that new behavior that will deliver the new outcome. So we had done some work. Actually, this is we done a workshop about a year ago, I believe, at the Defense Innovation Forum, and we asked folks, what are the biggest challenges they have around mindset, right? And we talk about mindset as part of a belief system around innovation. We asked them what was their biggest challenges, and they talked about this idea of fear of failure, aversion of risk, just plain old inertia, unwillingness to make change happen, the fact they don't get sponsorship from the senior leaders, that they really don't have permission to do the work they do, that nobody takes account, no one's accountable or owns the change itself, that people actually don't even care about it, that people don't understand that innovation is important to the organizational well-being long term. It's just a buzzword. Fundamental distrust, and it goes on. You can see the list here. So when we think about designing a culture of innovation, what you want to do is address these issues in a really open and positive way, and create alternative realities, which are really what will hopefully drive acceptance of innovation and innovation movement. So we want to drive people's curiosity and acceptance of change, and understanding what innovation is, just what's in it for me, right? We'll talk about that more in a minute. The potential rewards, and get the support and top cover you need, and get people to be accountable and ownership and objective, and be honest about what the problems are and what the opportunities are. Help other people along in the process, and be empathetic towards the risks being taken. And again, you can see the list, it goes on. But what we're looking to do is shape a culture that is based upon the beliefs and mindsets and mental models and principles of this worldview, as opposed to that worldview. And so it's really about how you imbue these sorts of thoughts in the organization at scale, and get conversations to happen. And and it's really easy to be dismissive about communication, but communication is everything when it comes to innovation and creating movements. Movements fundamentally are about enrollment and answering the question, what's in it for me? Why should I care? And if you're not driving those messages across the organization to all your stakeholders, then you will. And there was a question before the session today about silos, right? That's one of the reasons why you continue to have problems with silos, because people don't know why they should care. They don't know it's for them. They're not enrolled in the change that needs to happen. And so fundamentally, what you're looking to do is engaging not just the minds. It's not just about facts. It's not just about figures. It's not just about outcomes, but people's hearts as well. Because innovation is a very motivational thing when it's just explained correctly to people. And so with motivation in mind, this is a model that we created with BJ Fogg. And BJ has become quite famous over the years because he runs a very small program at Stanford, but very influential program called the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. And those for those engineers watching this, the formula on top is not a formula; it's just a memory aid. So don't hurt yourself trying to calculate that. So what it speaks to is the idea that culture change happens when you create a future motivated state, that's the FMS, and you clearly articulate your beliefs, AB, and then you relentlessly socialize. And I'll just take you through the model here. And it starts with the y-axis, and the y-axis is the FMS, future motivated state. And it works for macro culture change, but it also works for for discrete culture change projects, and I would say around innovation especially, which is really explaining to people, why is this important? What's in it for them? Why should they pay attention? Why should they care? Why should they be excited about about being involved in it and supporting the project. And the better you can articulate that, and the better you can explain that to people, the more successful you'll be in terms of getting buy-in across the organization. You need to create that motivation. You need to have clear language, and you need to visualize it. And I don't think we get into visualization much in this presentation, but visualizing ideas is, and words is the most important, effective way you will have to spread those ideas. It's very hard to spread language on its own. You want to attach it to things to spread it. Fine. So that's the y-axis. The x-axis is what we call articulated beliefs. And articulated beliefs is that roundel that we looked at a few minutes ago, the beliefs and mindsets, but also mental models, principles, worldviews, values that will help people understand how the work needs to get done on the innovation project. It is really about creating a language, and we talk about this idea that all transformation is linguistic. You need to have clear language around the change, around the innovation, around every aspect of how you want that work to be done. Again, you need the language, and it needs to be visualized. And so the last piece and most important piece of this is the S line going up to the right. And the S line is what we refer to as socialization. I typically say relentless socialization, because what we need to do is relentlessly socialize what the innovation is about, why it matters, what the movement is, and how to make it happen. So, so I'm talking for a minute or two about a project we did at Edwards Air Force Base a year or so ago. We were asked to help with actually the implementation of an idea scale program there, and idea scale had gone in, but there wasn't very high adoption with it, and they asked us to sort of how we could drive greater adoption to and integration of the platform into the 77,000 or so people on that part of the base. And so what we did was we really went in and understood what were people's real problems with innovation, akin to the list of positive and negative mindsets that we looked at from the Defense Innovation Forum. And what we did was we created really a movement around hashtag innovative AF, or innovative Air Force, not the other AF. And so, so what we did was we went in, we understood and did some work around understanding what were people's frustrations with innovation, what were the blockers, et cetera. We understood what the potential is for people on the base. We then created really a system of language and what we call semiotics, which is attaching the language to imagery to help spread it. And when we were sort of towards the tail end of the project, it only ran 70 days. Of course, that was the actual launch of the innovation movement, although obviously there was a lot of work done before and after that 90-day launch. But if you speak to General Teichert, who was the commander of the base at the time, he'll say, and this is, I think, a really important potential aspect for innovators, right? And he said, I'll just read the quotes. The most impactful portion of our innovation journey has been the base-wide cultural change. This intentionally crafted culture change has created a true innovation movement that is improving our ability to achieve the mission and boost quality of life. Okay. So for everyone who's interested in innovation, there's a couple of things going on that are some of it obvious, meaning there's new ideas, there's new programs, there's new executions, there's new things happening. You need to figure out how to do it. You need to execute it. You need to get adoption around those. But one of our arguments around innovation and creating cultures of innovation is that the most valuable outcome potentially of cultures of innovation are the actual improvement of organizational effectiveness on a macro sense. Meaning, yes, we're driving people to engage in idea scale, and we're driving people to think creatively about what could be improved. And yes, we're doing all these things. At the same time, though, we're reframing how people look at their work and how they connect to each other and what the potential is for how they can improve what they do every day. And this is something that's mostly overlooked in the innovation world, but hugely valuable. So this is a slide that they made, the Air Force made. We don't make slides that look like this because for us, I've looked at the slide hundreds of times. I still don't quite get it. But the point is, what we were asked to do, what was measured in our project, was really engagement around idea scale. And we were literally able to increase it by 100 times. You can see the orange line was the 70-day campaign execution that we ran. at Edwards, we got almost over 7,500 engagements around idea scale within that wing. The only thing that came close was the purple line, which yielded 1,800 or 2,000 engagements, but that was actually executed across the rest of the Air Force for 660,000 people. The orange line was just for 7,000 people. So we outperformed the rest of the Air Force by well over 100 times, a few hundred times. The point being, what drove that was really a new culture, a new way of looking at innovation, dealing with people's concerns, socializing and spreading new norms around how we need to be engaged around innovation, why it was important to individual airmen, and how to actually get engaged and involved in it. We did it through many different means. On the right side, that's General Teichert. On the lower right-hand corner, obviously lots of recognition, playbooks, all sorts of different ways of turning change into a movement, turning innovation into a movement. We have a device that we call a culture wall, which I think we may have. Okay, we don't have one. I'll show a video in a minute. But culture walls are basically grids that are physically, they are physical implementations of 12-inch square tiles, what we call tiles, that are placed in strategically in high traffic areas, where leaders can then have conversations around innovation, how to achieve it, what the beliefs and mindsets are that they want people to adopt, and then to drive change at scale. And those grids actually then integrate into comms programs and various things. And this is an example of one of the things that was done at Edwards and this is General Teichert presenting.
Hashtag fearlessness. That's what our nation needs from you, and that's what it needs from me. Our national defense strategy, our national objectives require us to be fearless, to be courageous in making sure that we are moving ahead to advance the needs of this great nation.
Okay, so that's General Teichert standing in front of this culture wall, pulling off one of the tiles, right, to talk about innovation and to a particular aspect of mindset that he wants people to adopt around innovation. It is all about the socialization of that norm. And he did 20 of these videos that were then pushed out. You can see them, many of them on the Edwards Air Force Base Facebook channel, which is public, plus internal comms used it, etc. The point being, what he was able to do was set a narrative around the culture that he wanted to have that would drive greater innovation. So the innovation is an outcome of the culture. The innovation does not drive the culture. It's an outcome from establishing the beliefs and mindsets and norms that you want people to adopt. So in many ways, what we have to remember, just tracking back to one of the things I said at the beginning, was that innovation comes from influence. You need to get that influence first, and what you need to be doing is thinking about, how do I get people to align and connect around what we're looking to do? You've got this idea of innovation, which should be the heart of a peaceful place within the organization, where people are invited to grow and develop and connect to something larger. And innovation for us is really about leadership. This is one of the reasons why we believe that chief innovation officers, and to the extent that CTOs or CIOs are responsible for innovation, should in fact at the same time possibly own culture on the macro sense for the organization. And I will just share, this is some work we've done for Microsoft and at MIT Sloan Review. And I think one of the things we cannot forget, and it's easy to forget this, is that when it comes to culture, building cultures of innovation, et cetera, these are not one-time acts, right? These are infinite games. And so you need to have the tools and the understanding of how to execute in a continuous way. And I'll close with this, which is several months ago, I was invited to Detroit to meet some Ford Motor Company execs. And we actually met at the Ford Innovation Museum, which is an incredible place. Anybody who hasn't been there, it's worth the trip just to go see it. And when when you enter the museum, sort of in the middle of the museum on the floor, there is a brass plaque, which you can see on the left side, which commemorates the Wright brothers' first flight, Kitty Hawk. And it occurred in December 1903, and the flight was was a total distance of 120 feet and at an altitude of 10 feet. And if you look at the right side of the slide, there's actually a brass line in the wall in the floor that takes you to the actual Kitty Hawk. It's a great exhibit. But the point is, you look at this plaque and you say, and you look at that date, 1903, and what you realize is in 60 years, just a little over 60 years, we were able to go from man's first flight from a distance of 120 feet and an altitude of 10 feet to go from that to the moon. And what that spoke to was really a culture of innovation, a deep belief that anything was possible, and this understanding that we had that we could do anything if we put our minds to it. And when we think about cultures of innovation, this to me is one of the greatest examples that there is. Because it's been over 50 years since we actually went to the moon, right? And in just 60 years, we went from basically nothing to being able to put a man 350,000, 400,000 miles away. And that is really what cultures of innovation can accomplish. So I see we have a few questions here. Jessica, how do you want to handle the...
Well, I was thinking I can read some of the questions to you so that everybody gets to hear them and then you can answer them. I want to compliment you, first of all, on your race to the finish. I feel like you really did get through, the reason why we're talking about this, but also some of your approaches that have been successful and some case studies, and all in 38 minutes. So let's see what we can do in the next 7. One of the first questions was about kind of, I think, changing mindsets of folks who are stuck in that old way of thinking. How do you enable dinosaurs, this person says, like me, to see the unseeable and the not recognized paradigm? So basically shifting from an old mindset of like recordings on audio tape and CDs to this new mindset of like streaming and the Napster online revolution.
So, okay. So I think the question, there's more of a strategic question here, which I kind of touched on, which is really about answering the question, why does this actually matter to anybody, right? Like, what's in it for them? Let's just say they don't get it. Let's just say it feels foreign and risky and awful and just not interesting. How do you, and this is rhetorical, how do you explain to them that this is not only for them, but it's important to their future, right? I think one of the things that we forget in big organizations especially is that when it comes to innovation, your customers are actually internal customers. You've got to really dig in and think about, why should they care? Because it's your job to make them care. And I think that it's easy to think about innovation and think about change in a corporate, a big organization, whether it's a corporate environment or public, doesn't really matter. But we think of these things as PM jobs. Oh, we got a project, we got to manage it. There's a checklist. We can go through the checklist, and at the end, we accomplish whatever we need to accomplish. But that's actually not the way humans work, right? We've got to connect to the emotion, and we have to connect to answer the question, why should anybody care about this? Because if you get everyone to care, you'll get the support, you get the budget, you get the buy-in, you get the connection to, we know it's risky, but it's worth, the outcome is worth it. And if we skip over that, you're kind of screwed.
Well, I thought there's another really timely question that I think actually is about capturing that energy of finally people getting it. It's there's been a lightning speed change of innovation attention in the healthcare world with this person's company with the advent of COVID-19. How would you use your approach to ensure that this remains a sustainable attitudinal shift and not a slide back to old norms?
So we've had this conversation at least half a dozen times this week. So this is a great question, right? And the answer is, okay, so you've got to really dissect what caused this change, right? And we always think of culture change as disruptive, right? It just is, right? And no one wants to be disrupted, really. But what COVID did was apply outside disruption that nobody could control, right? And it forced some new behaviors and mindsets. And I think, the answer here is really thinking deeply about what is it that actually changed? How are we thinking about problems differently? How are we connecting with each other differently? And then creating a language around what that was, what the feelings were, what actually changed and shifted, and then based upon that is then creating real narratives around that remind people and anchor them back to how it felt during COVID in a positive way, right? Because again, those changes, the COVID changes, yes, driven by crisis, but a lot of the changes were driven by emotion, right? We need to do this. There's a big, there's a new risk. People will die, right? So you have to be able to remind people you have to be able to remind people of what those emotional senses were that they had during the COVID period, and then not just turn it into another PM job, right? If that makes sense. So.
We had a practical question here. How long does a process like yours take, like the one at Edwards Air Force Base?
Well, Edwards, we probably started 60 days before the launch, probably continued 60 days after the launch. It was probably 5 months in total, 6 months. Length of time really depends upon how, and I'll be blunt about it, how screwed up the organization is. So sometimes, you go in and people are fairly aligned, and what they really need are tools. What they need are, to develop language, develop the tools to socialize new norms, to really create new ways of leading and new ways to influence at scale, right? And other times you have to go in and actually clear up a lot of dysfunction before you can even begin to do the forward-looking work. So it really depends on the projects where there's a lot of remedial work to do. It could take 6 months before you can actually launch. But change, we were on a call the other day with actually a commander of a Air Force wing, and he said to us, his understanding was it takes 7 years to change culture. That is not true, right? That is not true. You can change culture very quickly. Well, you changed culture for COVID in an instant, right? The question is, what are the catalysts that you have to make change happen?
We had a question here offline. So it sounds like socialization is absolutely a cornerstone of your process. And when you say socialization, do you mean a communication strategy? And how do you get beyond email?
Yeah, it's far more than yes, it is comm strategy, but that phrase doesn't do it justice. What you need to do is create immersive experiences. You need to have vectors. You need to design teams that are designed to actually spread the ideas. You need to actually create lots of innovative tools. Like there was a quick slide about some of the stuff we did at Edwards, but there were literally hundreds of touch points. Things that we do, like our culture walls, are designed as actually, didactic tools, right? They are tools designed to train people without actually training them. They're ways to connect people to experiences and make it immersive, right? So the connection of language to illustrations, what we call semiotic management systems, is a huge thing. That's where, the details matter a lot, and the way you actually design and execute that comm strategy, if you will, is really critical to the success. But it's not email, right? We use email because you kind of have to use email, but it's the last thing on our list of tools we use to communicate, because we know everyone's overloaded, right?
There was an interesting question here about, is it possible to have a company that is too focused on innovation, and can a company end up with something sort of like change fatigue?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So there is something, and we see it a lot, where people only value the newest idea, the newest, shiniest thing, and it's common in the tech world. And they tend to forget what got us here, and what works, and what's making us money, or what's making us successful. And so we call it institutional ADD, because because all that matters is like the newest idea. And so we work hard to focus people's attention on what's the appropriate amount of time to be spending on things before you're shifting to the next new thing. And it is very prevalent in tech and startups and what have you. So it's something to pay attention to.
we've got time for maybe a couple more questions here, but if we don't get a chance to answer them live, please get them in anyways, and we'll try and follow up with you afterwards. Before we say goodbye though, sounds like there's at least a temporary shift toward the work from home environment in terms of these cultural change tools. Do these tools transition well to a digital space?
Wait, I missed that. Can you repeat that?
With this transition to a work from home environment, do your cultural tools transition well to a digital space?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing about culture, right? If you think about culture as norms, you think about culture as beliefs and mindsets, they transcend physical interaction, right? It's truly psychology. And so what you need to do then is create that language, and you need to create the tools to actually embed it and spread it at distance, right? It is more powerful to do it in person, but it is by far the most powerful thing you can do to align, and when you can't be in person, right? So it's really digital spread, given that is all we have right now, it's really about codification of ideas and then tools to actually make spread happen. So you can do it virtually, it's not a problem.
And then let's see, one last question. I think this is an important one. What are some things to look out for in developing a culture of innovation in a multicultural environment?
Well, okay, so you've got to be sensitive to the norms that people bring, that show up with, right? And so when you say multicultural, to give a proper answer, I'd have to really understand that, more granularly. But I think the issue is, well, how are people showing up? And remember, it's an exercise in enrollment, right? And it's an exercise in getting people to care and answering the question, why should I care? So you've got to know what their motivations are before you can design. All right. We were just working on a project this morning in Italy, and the question we were asking, with a client who's in Italy, and what we were getting at was, okay, we have to understand, what are the beliefs and mindsets that people are showing up with before we can even make change happen. And so in a multicultural environment, you really got to think about who are the stakeholders. You got to ask them the questions. You got to understand where you're starting from for each one of them, and then align that along the way so you can get them all to this common place, which is supporting whatever your innovation movement is.
Well, I think that's a good place to end as well. We will be following up with those of you who submitted questions we didn't have time to answer. You can find out more about the Gapingvoid at gapingvoid.com. Jason, did you want to share your email address one more time so that folks can follow up with you as well? Yeah,
so Jason at gapingvoid.com or culture at gapingvoid.com. We do a newsletter 3 times a week, which people love. And I'm not, this is not just it's not a promotional newsletter. It's sharing deep ideas around how you make change happen. And if you go to gapingvoid.com, you can sign up there. And then obviously, I think with the success at Edwards, and then we are now currently redesigning the culture of innovation for the Global Strike Command, who are 35,000 airmen who are charged with with America's nuclear armaments. So, with the experience that we've had in innovation in various forms, there's just a ton of insight we can bring to how you make it happen at scale. And I think that given the state of the world today, everyone's struggling with that. So happy to help. Just let us know. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Jessica. It's been fun. And
thanks so much. Really great presentation. Can't wait to share it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining. Bye.